When I was 18 years old, I nearly died. I had mono with secondary infections in my ears, nose, and throat. Unable to swallow, my weight plummeted to 76 pounds. Just as I was being transported to hospital, all of a sudden, everything changed. I had the sensation of somehow floating outside of my body, almost as if I was watching a movie of me. It was both odd and exhilarating at the same time, and I remember wondering, how is this even possible? Nothing hurt. I didn't feel constricted by my body. In fact, it didn't even feel like I owned one. I made a decision then and there that one day I would work with people who were terminally ill, because dying just didn't seem so scary. Was my experience real? Could I have possibly dreamed it up? Yeah, I suppose so. But the more important question is, does it really matter? For it's how we perceive our experiences that ultimately create our reality. At 36, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. The diagnosis was like a tsunami obliterating everything I knew. I was angry. I was sad. I felt lost and scared. I could barely eat or sleep. But the worst was when I looked in the mirror, I no longer recognized the eyes that were staring back at me. How does one even begin a battle of such magnitude? Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." The night before surgery, my middle daughter, Cassie, awoke from a nightmare and asked, "Mummy, if you die, who will ever make me feel as good about myself as you have?" It was pretty simple to figure out my why. I had to be there for my girls. It was the how I had to work on. I had to go from the person who did everything for everyone else to the one who prioritized herself first. It was different for me. It wasn't what I was used to. And I needed to continuously remind myself that I wasn't being selfish. This change impacted my entire family, but most profoundly my husband, Jonathan. I remember I was getting so good at it that a few years later, after I was standing my ground with a bit of an argument, he looked at me and said, "Whatever happened to that sweet little girl I married?" I remember staring him in the face and saying, "She is long gone. And the strong, independent woman you never knew you wanted, she's the one who has taken her place." I'm grateful to say he did eventually like to know that woman. When our backs are against the wall and we don't know where to turn, sometimes we move towards faith. For me, that was true. I was desperate to believe in something, to hang on to something that would help me make sense of this new reality. Doctors were great at dealing with my physical body, but we are much more than just physical beings. We are emotional and spiritual beings, and those needs need to be addressed as well. And so I made up a story. I made up a story which helped me feel secure. And that story allowed me to create a foundation upon which I could build. I remembered how safe I felt as a little girl when I placed my tiny hand in my father's great big paw. I recalled his eyes reflecting pure love and endless possibility, and I knew that was what I needed. I needed it so badly. So with those elements in mind, I created a protector, my protector, one who stood by me in the darkest of times, who held my hand and who rocked me the way I rocked my daughters when they were small. Even now when I close my eyes, I kind of sense him close by. The stories we create in light of that which we face help define our experience. I once worked with a little boy. He was angry at the cancer growing inside his body. He saw it as a monster. It was big and black, looming as if it was ready to pounce upon him. Poor little guy was exhausted, trying to keep the monster at bay. The first thing we did was create a magic bubble that surrounded him even while he slept, and nothing bad could penetrate that bubble. It became his safe place, his private sanctuary. And then we played a game. We tried to figure out where the monster liked to hide, and we'd find creative ways of scaring and of trapping him. The story we created helped a little boy come to terms with what he may not have been able to understand. When he went into remission, he invited the monster to a celebratory dinner, and they walked together, hand in hand. Most of us use stories each and every day. What we may not be used to is doing it with intention. At one point or another in our lives, we're all going to have somebody who simply drives us crazy. Unfortunately for me, it happened to have been my mother-in-law. No matter what I did, no matter what I said, I just couldn't get it right. She would come into my home and leave her initials on any dust she found in the furniture. She'd roll her eyes at what my girls were wearing, how I ironed my husband's shirts, or even what I fed my family. Everything was fodder for her judgment. After years of suffering and being beaten down under her scrutiny, I knew that I had to change the way I saw her if I was going to be happy. So I used creative license. I imagined shrinking her down to the size of a postage stamp where all I could see was her mouth rapidly opening and closing like a bird hungry for its next meal. And then when I didn't like what she had to say, I gave myself permission to simply press the mute button and put her in my back pocket, exactly where she belonged. The interesting thing is, the more I did this, the less power she had over me. And the less power she had over me, the more I actually got to know her. To both of our surprise, we eventually grew to not only respect, but to love one another. The power of story to change our perspective can be profound. In this case, it moved me from victim to victor. Just as I was being certified as a natural health consultant, I was told that 3 tumors had taken up residence in my right lung. The hospital stay remains pretty much of a blur, except for the exquisite pain from having a lung removed and the sheer difficulty in taking a simple breath. You know, with colon cancer, I was given a 95% chance of living disease-free. And although the prognosis was great, the diagnosis so shocked me that I was left unable to make any decisions for myself. And I relied solely on my doctors. I followed their recommendations to the T and basically gave them the task of healing me. With lung cancer, I was only given a 25% chance to live 5 years. I chose surgery, but refused chemotherapy or any other medical intervention. And let me tell you, the doctors were not at all pleased with my decision. They tried relentlessly to get me to change my mind, but there was something new, something strong that was growing inside of me that I had never experienced before. The years in between the 2 cancers gave me enough time to acquire tools and strategies that I knew would help me through this really difficult time. And irrespective of outcome, whether I lived or whether I died, I knew that this time I was going to do it my way. Recovery was probably one of the most difficult tasks I ever undertook. Each breath felt like there was a 100-pound weight upon my chest, and each step felt like a marathon. I was exhausted all the time. I remember closing my eyes and imagining myself covered in quills. Not the quills that were prickly and sharp, but undulating tubule-like structures that allowed me to suck in air from the outside and nourish my remaining lung. I saw my lung like a balloon filling up with air, and the stronger I got, the more the balloon expanded. The more the balloon expanded, the stronger I got. I laced up my running shoes, and I never took them off. Each step led to the next until I was literally walking miles. I was relentless, and my passion to survive fueled me to go above and beyond any personal limitation until eventually I created the breathing capacity of 2 lungs in the space of 1. My doctor told me that what I had done, in his estimation, was anatomically impossible. And I was so damn grateful he hadn't told me that before I did it, or I might not have been able to. You know, just because you see it, just because you want it, just because you desire it, just because you believe it, does not mean it happens right away. It took me years to accomplish this feat, but led me to the realization that the word impossible simply means it hasn't been done yet. I had a client who was very close to the end of her life. While she accepted her reality, what made it impossible for her to let go was her fear of the actual moment of death. She feared she would fall into a bleak abyss of nothingness, and that all meaning of her life would be obliterated the moment she entered the void. And so she hung on, terrified and petrified. Clearly, she needed a new story. As we were talking, I was struck with an idea. What made you choose to call your eldest daughter Mariposa? I asked her, the Spanish word for butterfly. She told me that her entire life she had been fascinated by butterflies ever since she was a little girl. Their ability to transform themselves from such seemingly mundane creatures into one so beautiful and free. And when she was going through the pains of a very difficult labor, there was a moment that it was not certain whether her daughter would live or not. The image of the butterfly came to her mind, and it helped her push through a very difficult time, and ultimately, out came her beautiful Mariposa, her beautiful little butterfly. We talked about the similarities of birth and death, both dealing with aspects of the unknown, both having elements of pain and suffering, but both having the incredible transformation capacity. About a week later, she called me to the hospital. Her family left the room to give us some privacy. I climbed into bed and snuggled up close. She sounded excited like a little girl. Susan, Susan, she said, I can't stop thinking about the butterfly. Every time I close my eyes, I see myself breaking free from my cocoon. Yes, there's pain and even some struggle, but that moment I take my first breath and spread my wings, I know I'm free. Hundreds of butterflies come to greet me, to show me my way home. I'm ready, Susan. I'm not scared anymore. It's time to let go. She was calm and serene. She died peacefully during the night. Life has peaks and valleys, and there will always be challenges for us to face along the way. While we may not necessarily be responsible for the situations we find ourselves in, what we choose to do with them is up to us. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. One of the ways he survived the war was by telling himself stories that soothed his soul. He wasn't certain whether his wife was alive or not, but he chose to communicate with her and talk to her on a daily basis. Each night, he imagined them dining together, the table laden with some of their favorite foods. Never questioning these fantasies, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he said, "The only thing that cannot be taken away from any of us, the last of our human freedoms, is our ability to choose how we respond to any circumstance we might face." Frankl reminds us that the quality of our lives will not be determined by the things that happen to us, but rather by what we choose to do with those things. And so I ask you, how will you respond when your back is up against the wall? Will you fall into despair, fearing there's nothing else you could do? Or give weight to the idea that impossible simply means it hasn't been done yet? The power of story can be life-changing. It will all depend on how you choose to tell yours. With a bit of creativity and imagination, with some practice and patience and permission to go beyond that which you see, you will have the capacity to not only change your perspective, but to alter the course of your life. Thank you.